Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this inauguration and launch of the Westminster Centre for Teaching Innovation. My name's Roland Danreuter. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for the Student Experience. And I really just want to thank, firstly, our keynote speaker, Professor Christopher Newfield. Particular welcome to anyone coming from outside of the university, our guests here. To welcome our staff, and perhaps most importantly, we have a scattering of students around who will also be presenting some of their interesting, innovative ideas to support the learning environment. What I want to say is really very briefly is just that the CTI, the Centre for Teaching Innovation, seeks to reflect and build upon the legacy, history, and innovative spirit of the university. From its earliest days as the Regent Street Polytechnic, under the inspired leadership of Quinton Hogg, teaching has been at the heart of the mission of this university, focusing in particular on students from disadvantaged backgrounds and seeking to give them a practical education that will genuinely transform their lives. This commitment remains at the heart of what we do today. We have a significantly higher proportion of our students coming from families with lower occupations. Over 60%, 65% of our students are black, minority, ethnic. We have 118 different nationalities amongst our students. We are diverse, we celebrate that diversity, and we celebrate being a London institution with all the excitement and dynamism that makes this a great global city. To achieve this mission, we need teaching and our learning environment to adapt to the changing needs of our students. The Centre for Teaching Innovation builds upon the three-year programme which we called Learning Futures, which thoroughly revised our curriculum, embedded employability and internationalisation, ensured that we have cutting-edge and dynamic learning environments, and made sure that our courses are fit for the 21st century. Learning Futures have provided the foundations for a modern, up-to-date portfolio of courses which will attract and meet the needs of students in the future. The Centre for Teaching Innovation will take this agenda forward. Its ethos is pluralistic, open, providing a supportive environment for innovation in the ways in which we teach and in the ways in which we ensure that we provide the best learning experience for our students. And at this point, I want to bring to the podium Professor Terry Lamb, who is the head of the Centre for Teaching Innovation, to give an overview of some of its key objectives.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking you all for coming this evening to celebrate our Centre for Teaching Innovation, as we affectionately know it, the CTI. It's lovely to see you all here, friends from within the university and from beyond. We hope you enjoy your evening. Almost a year ago, I had my interview to take up a position here as Professor of Pedagogy. And as part of that, I had to do a brief presentation. A part of that was to come up with a vision for 5 years' time. What did I imagine pedagogy in Westminster to be? My vision was that in 5 years' time, we would have a nationally and internationally known centre for innovative and transformational pedagogies. Little did I know at that time that Professor Danreuter, who would become my colleague, of course, had already had that vision and had got the CTI approved already within the university. So thank you, Roland, because you got my 5-year plan off to a really good start. Thank you. I then spent, when I started here, I spent quite a bit of time, and still do, moving around the various campuses, meeting lots of people, and finding out what's going on. And I've been inspired by the colleagues that I met here, and the practices that are going on, and the enthusiasm and passion for teaching. I quickly realized that any ideas I had were probably already being done here anyway, somewhere. So I decided that, in fact, and no, that's me. This is the mission of the CTI. That actually the first thing that we need to do as a centre is to pull together all of these various practices, all of the innovations that are going on, because they are happening all over. Sometimes people don't know what's going on in other faculties, so the centre needs to pull all of that together, showcase it, and provide opportunities for people to share, learn from each other. The website, the online website will in fact do that. I mean, it's an umbrella website which really kind of shows what is going on across the university. The CTI's mission there, and I'm not going to read it out for you, but it gives you some ideas around what we are doing. You'll see words such as strategic, academic leadership, pedagogic reflection, development and innovation. That's research-led, coherent, inclusive, intercultural, relevant, distinctive. And what I'd rather do now is just spend a bit of time talking you through how we aim to achieve this vision. I'll show you this again later on, once I've unpacked it a little bit. So, how will we do this? First of all, the CTI will act as champion of learning and teaching. We see teaching as the linchpin of the university. Many thousands of students come through our doors every year. They deserve the most inspirational, the most effective kinds of teaching possible. People who contribute to that teaching bear great responsibility. Teaching brings a lot of responsibility. But people who are ensuring that our students are achieving their potential, no matter what that potential is, also need and deserve support in that, and they need recognition for doing that. Teaching is very, very, very important and central to our university. Teachers need to be fired up. They need to be excited about what they're doing. They need to be able to have conversations with other people, share their ideas, experiment, take risks, reflect, learn. And they also need to be recognized for what they're doing. So we will be championing learning and teaching in a number of ways. I'll just mention three briefly. First of all, we'll be showcasing people's work. We'll be showing what people are doing. We'll be showing that it's valued, and we'll be promoting it internally and externally. We'll bring together existing activities such as the Westminster Teaching Excellence Awards, the Prestige Programme, highly successful in supporting our colleagues to fellowship of the HEA, the annual Learning and Teaching Symposium, which this year appropriately is called Innovate, with an exclamation mark. We'll find new ways of nurturing pedagogic leadership, people who are going to advocate teaching, and we'll also be promoting and supporting career development pathways that are teaching focused, so promotion opportunities to readership and professorship. Secondly, we'll be launching the Westminster Learning Communities. These will enable people to come together, to collaborate, to develop their own ideas with other people, to expand ideas that they may have been trying out themselves. Across the faculties, these communities of practice will flourish, we hope, and they will be able to build wider networks. Communities will connect with communities. This is how we see it. And you'll see from the branding, various kinds of branding, we've got connections, we've got networks, we've got people joining together. So this is how we intend to drive innovation, the I bit of the CTI. We see the CTI as an incubator, a space that enables innovations to bubble up. And thirdly, our learning communities will extend beyond the university. Our students' learning will be enhanced by our engagement with employer networks, with charities, with cultural organizations, and I know some are represented here this evening, local communities. We'll continue to enhance our students' employability and build on Westminster's tradition of civic engagement. To enhance the currency of teaching, we're developing a pedagogic research strategy to nurture and support a culture of collaborative pedagogic scholarship, research and publication across the university. And of course, this isn't just about raising the profile and status of teaching. This will also feed back into our teaching, drive innovation, make sure that what we're doing is evidence-based. The Westminster learning communities that I've just mentioned are, of course, part of that pedagogic research strategy. Westminster's committed to involving our students too in pedagogical development, but also enabling them to research into learning and teaching. A few years ago, the university launched the Students as Co-Creators project. And our new University Director of Student Partnership, Dr. Jennifer Fraser, has been appointed to build on this and enable the student voice to develop further, to build on what is already there, to work on our student partnerships. You'll learn more about this later on because we have some students who are going to be contributing to this presentation, as Roland pointed out. As we progress through the 21st century, we all know that we're facing challenges that really can only be addressed through interdisciplinary teams, perspectives from different orientations. So we have appointed a University Director of cross-disciplinary learning and teaching, Dr. Thomas Moore, who will be looking at what is already going on in terms of interdisciplinarity across the university, but who has started really by focusing on the cross-disciplinary Westminster Plus electives. And in fact, we're launching some new ones next year, looking at Brexit, one of them, looking at China in a globalizing world, and also looking at a super diverse London street. And we look forward to further developments in that area. And finally, we have a curriculum role as well, a curriculum innovation role, future scoping, making sure that we're aware of what we need to do, not only in terms of content of curriculum and new programs, but also new modes of delivery. We need to make sure that people have access to higher education, no matter what their circumstances. So we'll be working with faculties and corporate services to continue to build our infrastructure and our learning spaces. And we have some wonderful ones here because a lot of work's gone into that already. But we will be looking at new ways of delivering courses. And of course, technology plays a part in that. And there's already a lot of work that's gone on in technological development here, and some really exciting work, some of which you'll see later on. We have the virtual reality work in our law school, and you'll hear more about that in a bit. But also other things, such as mobile learning in the Faculty of Science and Technology, many things. We're a very international university. And so we'll also be working with our Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Global Engagement, Professor Alex Hughes, to sustain the internationalisation of our curriculum and our pedagogy in these challenging times, where we seem, as a nation, to be building metaphorical walls rather than knocking them down. So I hope that's just given you a flavour of how we intend to address our mission. Our focus is on our students, and how we enable them to achieve success, to take their place in society, to make a difference, to be innovative, to be critical, and to critically question assumptions, to challenge social injustice. So a transformative pedagogy. To finish, this is our vision. And the only thing I really want to say is that we are outward looking. So our web space is outward facing. We have an outward facing online platform which will enable our colleagues to work together, but will also enable us to work with people from beyond the university walls. And we hope that you'll visit this from time to time, and we look forward to working with you as partners, whether you're in the university or outside the university. But together we want to raise the status of teaching in higher education, and we want to develop innovative, transformative, interdisciplinary pedagogies. So, enough of me. I'm now very happy to introduce Professor Christopher Newfield from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Chris is internationally known for his work on critical university studies. His most recent book is called The Great Mistake and considers the post-2008 struggles of public universities to rebuild their social missions. I'm sure you're going to give us something to think about, and I look forward to that.
I'm really delighted to be here. It's quite an honor to be present at the launch of this center. The subject is very close to my heart. I started out in literary studies and critical theory in particular, and one of the foci of graduate study was to sort of elevate above the level of everyday pedagogy and to think in a different register and a higher plane. And as I got further into the profession, I realized that I had it really upside down, that the higher learning, which is kind of my subject today, was actually happening in the classroom and in continuous contact with regular folks who were bringing issues from the outside society into the classroom and making me think and rethink what I was trying to teach them about Emerson or Melville or Hegel or Kant, something that seemed on a different plane. So it's, in a way, I feel like I've kind of been on a pilgrimage towards seeing teaching as actually at the center of university practice on the highest level, not on the level of where we're thinking about intake. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to that and how I see this project that we're collectively embarked on in the context of some debates about the future, the present and the future of the university. You can tell from the topic that I think that we can only understand the value of teaching both to individuals and to the wider society in the context of the university as a public good for the society. And the argument of the book that was just mentioned, The Great Mistake, or the subtitle is How We Wrecked Public Universities and How We Can Fix Them, is that when we treat universities as a private good, when we apply business methods to them in a mechanical way, when we measure teaching outputs in terms of future salaries, among other metrics, we actually eviscerate the financial stability of the university as well as reduce its social value. So I will be just briefly alluding to that, and I'll just dive into this now. As you know, the university used to be kind of a special institution in all of our societies, really, globally, but in particular in societies that were influenced by Western Europe. In recent years, they've come under a pall of suspicion that continues to surprise a number of us who work in them. And I think of the plight that is the plight of suspicion as having at least three dimensions, although there are more. The first is the criticism that universities are too expensive, that regular people can't afford to go to them without taking on burdensome debt. The second is that the people inside universities are too privileged, they're out of touch with regular social concerns, they're unwilling to submit to the regular business discipline that working people have to submit to all the time. That we are faculty-centered and interested in pursuing our own interests rather than the interests of the wider society. And the third is that we're too impractical. We're teaching students what interests us rather than teaching students what will help them into employability. So there are a series of solutions that you also will be familiar with. The first is if the university is too expensive, it can cut its costs. We can do that in part by ending all or at least some of the public subsidies that have been flowing into the public systems in all of our countries. And we can also force private sector efficiencies onto the resources that remain. We can shift, as we've been doing in the United States for decades, the revenue streams from public subsidies, which are seen to be undisciplined, to private sort of consumption flows, which are seen as focused and more objective and more disciplined. If professors and related staff are too privileged, we can subject them to external audit. We can evaluate universities according to ranking metrics, among others. And we can reduce resources, get people to be more efficient by making them do more with less. And then the third, if we're too impractical, we shift folks towards work skills. We focus on vocationality and employability rather than on what's seen to be personal development initiatives or curiosity-driven forms of intellectual pleasure. There's some merit to each of these solutions. My own view, and the one that I argue at length in the book and also the ones that preceded it, is that the costs of these solutions outweigh the benefits, and that we're lowering the value both to individual students and to the society when we impose these. But at the very least, I think what we can say is that there are a series of unintended consequences that follow from these. One is that when we say that the university is too expensive, our solutions are actually making it even more expensive for students and making overhead higher or more expensive for universities themselves. When we say that universities are too privileged and we submit them to various forms of audit and austerity, there's a tendency to reduce the morale of staff across the board, and also in complicated ways to reduce the public value of universities. And then third, when we say that universities are too impractical and they need to shift learning towards vocationality, one of the major effects is that we limit learning. There was a book that you may or may not have heard of called Academically Adrift that was in the education world a kind of a blockbuster in the US, written by two sociologists who argued on the basis of a couple of fairly well-known qualitative learning instruments that today's students are learning about half, judged by standard deviations of learning gain, of what their parents had learned 20 or 30 years ago, and that many students in university are not learning anything at all. And that was at least the claim. It was globalized and not particularly specified. My claim would be that this is in fact an effect of the solutionism that we've been applying to public universities for a number of years. Right? What I've done is, in this book, is I've taken a series of trends and I've created a heuristic that shows a series of knock-on effects, and I am not actually going to march us frog style through this cycle today. I'm just going to focus our attention on the sixth. It starts with not understanding the public good value of education, from which a whole series of negative or sort of suboptimal outcomes flow. But I'm most interested in these at the sort of towards the end, and I'm mostly going to talk about six. As a result of a series of revenue problems and long-term sort of permanent austerity, and also the constant thinking about the budget dimension of any educational activity, where the budget tends to drive the thinking about the educational outcomes that one wants. Universities, particularly in the US, and I think that this is coming here, either underfund, that is cheapen their core activity of instruction, or they actually try to outsource it. In the US, this limited learning outcome was produced by a couple of solutions that became prominent in the wake of the 2009 downturn. An example of one of them was in the University of California system and at UCLA in particular, and that was to do an audit of what we call majors and what you call courses to make sure that nobody who was completing a course was taking too many courses that were slowing down their progress to degree. The metric was progress to degree, time to degree. And so a number of majors eliminated previously required courses in order to speed up that time. The question that was not asked and that was answered sort of negatively by the people who did ask it informally is, does this also reduce the learning that students in courses are getting when a series of electives or a complex set of courses is simplified to improve the throughput of the pipeline. Another example that became globally well known was the attempt to replace at least some personal, sort of face-to-face instruction with digital learning in the form of educational technology that was manifested in 2012 and 2013 in the form of massively open online courses, or MOOCs. The wave crashed fairly quickly in 2013 as a result of studying what those courses actually did in terms of their learning outputs. But for a while, it looked as though we could take the element that had already been squeezed quite a bit in the university, which was instruction, and squeeze it even more by replacing some percentage of live instructors with MOOC courses. So in 2012, the governor of California called a Google engineer by the name of Sebastian Thrun, who had started a company called Udacity on the basis of the high global enrollments of a MOOC that he'd spun off from a Stanford artificial intelligence course in 2011, and asked him if he could do something for San Jose State University, which is a now rather poor state university right down the road from the richest companies in the world, such as Apple and Google. And he asked if trouble that they'd been having with a remedial engineering course, which is still one of the core sort of courses or majors that San Jose State offers, could be replaced successfully by a Udacity MOOC. So these are remedial students, and the claim that MOOCs were making is, well, we are as good or better than face-to-face. And so there was a state summit signing ceremony with the chancellor of the university system. It has nearly 500,000 students, and the head of that campus, and Sebastian Thrun, and the governor of the state of California all presiding over the signing. It was kind of like one of Trump's executive orders, with actually a kind of a similar effect, because the three courses that were then studied finally by the National Science Foundation after the contracts were signed showed that putting the remedial engineering students into a MOOC engineering course cut their learning by almost half. At the same time that this was going on, a small research group that I had organized started to look at the effect of ed tech in the California community college system. This has somewhere between 1.5 million and 2 million students, depending on the economy, part-time and full-time. They have a 10-year record of hundreds of thousands of course takers in both face-to-face and online courses. And what we found was this, which we'd broken down by racial distribution. The red bars are face-to-face results. These are basic skills courses. And the blue bars are the outcomes of the online version of the same courses. And what you can see is that there's a little bit of improvement, actually. There's a little bit of learning how to learn in a MOOC. But there are two things that are worth noting that are not quite so positive. The first is that the online courses always do worse in every year for every racial group. And the second thing to notice is that African Americans and Latinos, or what are underrepresented minorities, URMs in the title, who are the most disadvantaged in terms of educational resources that they're bringing into these institutions, do the worst in terms of the gap between face-to-face and online. In other words, the best way to take a racial minority majority state or region or country and lower the learning is to put your underrepresented minority students into MOOCs or into online in general. So this is of concern, because as part of the attempt to do cost savings, we were actually getting the suboptimal or negative output of, we were lowering costs. That's a separate issue I'm happy to talk about. It doesn't actually lower them. But we were also lowering learning in the time that we were doing that. So the book also argues that we are at the center of this thing that I'm thinking of as the recovery cycle, that decline cycle can actually be flipped around. There are there's 8 here, elements that are involved in that. A lot of elements of this complicated equation have to be solved at the same time. The one that I want to end with by talking about a little bit is number 6, again, is turning this reduction of basically access to personalized instruction and the other things that Terry was just talking about that you're attempting to develop here into something that is available not only for the elite students that end up going to places like Cambridge and Oxford and Stanford and Duke and Harvard, but that go to regional 2-year colleges and regional 4-year colleges in all of the countries that no longer have actually the individual resources to pay for high-level education themselves. So I'm going to focus on this last bit, and I'm going to talk about what I think is involved in this through the experiences that I've had with the students that I've taught partly at Rice University in Houston, which is where I started my career, and then over the many years that I've been at the Santa Barbara campus of the University of California, which is kind of a classic, formerly middle-class campus, which now is a Hispanic serving institution, meaning that 25% of our students are Latinos, and which has a very large number of low-income students who are now working anywhere between 10 and 30 hours a week to minimize the amount of loans that they're taking out in order to cover cost of attendance. Okay, so I've lived through in this period that I've taught essentially 10,000 students, a demographic shift that has actually sharpened not only my concern about the budgetary aspects, but also my interest in producing a kind of educational quality, the type that I know that you are working on here. And the question that I bring to this is, how is it that each of students that are kind of massified in these large systems that we have, how is each student supposed to find the issue that really matters to her as an individual, but that also matters in some way to the outside world? And how is she then supposed to approach this issue and do something of value to her and then also to the outside world with it? These questions are involved in this process that all of us are engaged in the classroom of turning somebody's topic, which is hard enough to find in itself, into a project. It involves a series of steps, including forming a research question, sorting through research materials that may be relevant, and then developing a process for deciding what to include and exclude. I mean, my students often ask me as we're, say, the 3rd week of our term, what's our prompt for this paper? And they assume that I will give them the topic and the materials that they are supposed to use to discuss it. What I always say is that you need to make your own prompt. That's the first step for writing this paper. So when a college professor says, I've listed the topics for the midterm paper that is due in week 5, he describes a known entity. When he says, as I do each term, your midterm paper due in week 5 is the research phase of a 10-week investigation about something that matters to you, that known entity disappears. The student needs to construct the project, its process, before that entity in the assignment actually exists. This is the point at which what is sometimes called mastery learning ends, right? Mastery learning is all students learning all the material, not just the 20 or 30% best, but everybody. This is the point at which mastery learning ends and creativity learning begins. More accurately, it's the point when mastery learning serves as the starting point for a creative process that involves reflection, analysis, and discovery, all assembled into an undergraduate project. Projects require planning. Planning means sequencing a series of steps and then performing them. Performing steps means keeping records about them, keeping the relationships among the steps more or less in one's conscious mind, and then tracking the results. Tracking the results requires the ability to describe and analyze incomplete information, uncertainty, ambiguity, contradiction, incoherence, or the refutation of one's hypothesis, sometimes by people who are actively hostile to who one is and what one thinks. All of this is involved in writing a non-routine 5-page paper. So how do we, who have been doing this for, say, 30 years, how did we learn how to do this? And then how do we pass this knowledge on? And I pause to emphasize that, I think that learning is magic. It's amazing. It's a miracle. The existential state of not knowing something, transmitting or transferring into the state where you do know it, where you don't get it and you look at it and it's opaque and then you see, is, it's revelation, it's secular revelation, and it's the thing that keeps me going through whatever the budget and sort of administrative issues are that we're now suffering in the efforts to do our job normally. A paper talk can produce an existential crisis, and often does. Just talking about papers produces one in me, obviously. Uncertainty recurs throughout the process of discovery, and it's easy enough to experience oneself in this process as basically stupid. Feelings of stupidity are what universities need to help masses of people overcome. They teach, that is, universities, two inseparable things at the same time. The first is how to structure thinking into research projects that address major topics that emerge from personal interests, whether we call that instruction or research, art or science. The second is self-awareness of one's identity as a person and thinker, which enables project thinking to proceed. We often try to use technology to present material and to rehearse learning in it. Some help does come from external and internal audits. Advocates of online instruction pitched it in large part as an audit mechanism, and if you are partial to external controls, then you will be more impressed with online than otherwise. But studies of motivations and incentives generally conclude that internal motivation is most important. An emerging biopsychological strain of cognitive research suggests that learning is always structured and propelled by personal identity and interest. To improve learning, we don't want to weaken individuality, but to develop and strengthen it. The problem is that public universities do not now have enough money to offer the personalized instruction that forms the strong personalities on which creative capabilities rest. The work that was most often cited to prove that colleges aren't teaching anything, and that includes the book I mentioned, Academically Adrift, actually showed that most students lack intellectual advising, lack study time, and lack coherent curricula. Students who have advising and coherent academic majors actually advance quite well. It's just that few public systems now have the money to give this to their students. So in insisting that college is about both personal interests and personal projects, I'm drawing on a venerable humanistic definition of the uses of the university. This humanism has always seen the liberal arts and sciences as central to higher education. They are liberal because all of their disciplines, from linguistics to history to sociology to astrophysics, focus simultaneously on subject expertise and on the formation of the self that is acquiring the expertise. Vocational training cannot be separated from self-development. The training is only as good as the self that grasps it. Every liberal arts and sciences course in a university is in principle about intellectual development and self-development at the same time. The practice is simultaneously individual and collective, personal and social, private and public. This non-dualistic practice acknowledges the united fates of individuals and society and is the hinge of the development of society as a whole. This liberal arts vision of combining intellectual and self-development seems limited at first, but it covers the political spectrum from the pedagogy of the oppressed and radically democratic grassroots educational movements to Christian universities' interest in the spiritual welfare of their students. Universal higher learning was actually an animating vision of the engineering professors who founded some of those MOOCs that I just criticized. The 19th century had already put self-development at the center of higher learning. And when I say this, I invoke radical visionaries like the poet Walt Whitman, as well as establishment university presidents. The University of Chicago's founding president, William Rainey Harper, an intimate of the Rockefeller donors and their circles, praised the university's practical career focus by noting that it produced graduates who could, what he called, develop their own methods of work. Similarly, the conservative president of the University of California, Benjamin Wheeler, said in the year 1900 that the university proposes to rescue men from slavery and make them free from the bondage of routine. A free man is a man who can initiate. University philosophers and administrators did not simply espouse these concepts as ideals, but instituted them. And the concepts remain central to daily academic practice, to the pleasures and struggles of learning in both teaching and research, even during the advent of the corporate multiversity that has arrived in all of our countries during the 20th century. Our current emphasis on creativity and innovation was already present in the mid-20th century awareness that democracy required widespread higher learning. The report of the Harvard Committee of 1945, kind of a Cold War document entitled General Education in a Free Society, argued that the university must, quote, reflect two characteristic facets of democracy. The one, its creativity, sprung from the self-trust of its members. The other, its exposure to discord and even to fundamental divergence of standards precisely because of this creativity, the source of its strength. Here, self-trust is the essential prerequisite of creativity, as is working with contradiction, dissonance, and what we would now call cultural conflict and racial diversity. Democratic citizens had to have knowledge and skills and the personal capabilities that would enable them, without anguish and hostility, to interpret ambiguous information, find new data, and undertake continuous revision, all in conjunction with people not much like themselves. Democratic citizens had to be as familiar with the process of knowledge creation as with established knowledge itself. They had to see learning and research as permanently combined. They had to see that all learning is research learning, and then be the kind of people who could practice this. What we sometimes call the innovation economy should instead be called the knowledge society or the creative society. And it also has another feature, which is this, that it only works if it is a classless society in the sense defined by C.L.R. James, Christopher Lasch, and many others as the democratization of intelligence. The means to this society is to universalize as much as humanly possible every university student's development of creative capabilities. The condition of individual life and consciousness is more important in humanistic traditions than our economic requirements, although these are actually assisted by this same humanistic understanding of development. The core assumption of the university humanities is that creative capabilities serve at least three core missions: self-development, democratic citizenship, and then sustainable economic development. So the obvious next question is, what are those creative capabilities today? And I would informally codify these in a longish list that I'm not going to go through individually, but there are 12 or 13 of these, and they are, I think, things that need to be given to absolutely every student that comes through our doors, where R means every kind of higher education institution that we can imagine. They include not only basic subject knowledge, which is the thing that we always start with, but knowledge of a field's major questions. An ability, I think number 3 is absolutely vital, a developed capacity for being interested in questions where the answer is non-obvious. This is a painful experience if you're not used to it, because you just feel confused, you feel stupid. Formation of a project topic, which I've already talked about, the development of a research question, the planning of the investigation, which is something that I still struggle with after 30 years, that is actually writing down the steps and revising them and then doing them, marching yourself through them, revising methods, the organization of the research, including just writing stuff down. Keeping a lab book is much harder than it actually seems. The interpretation of research results, and I can't emphasize enough something that I think everyone in this room already knows quite well, which is the difficulty of passing on the nonetheless indispensable skill of dealing with divergent information, with cognitive dissonance, with interpreting tacit, informal, unsanctioned, disorganized information, interpreting anomalies rather than just throwing them out, looking at things that show that you are actually quite wrong in what you're thinking and figuring out what to do next. 9, turning this into a coherent storyline that is sense-making so that other people can understand it so it can be simplified without losing content, presentation and responding to criticisms, ability to reformulate conclusions, and narrative in response to new information. This is a really difficult thing, changing one's mind, in other words. And then the ability to advocate and to fight against opposition, including against opposition of people who think that you don't even belong in this country. In other words, dealing with radical conflict and doing it in a way that grows out of the knowledge structure that one has developed a personal relationship to by actually going through all of these steps. The place that I would put this kind of thinking, and I'm going to wrap this up in a second, is in the context of a better series of long-term responses to those public expressions of skepticism that I've described. And there's very quickly, to the response that the university is too expensive, I think we need a different business model. There's a lot of detail on this in the book that zeroes out student debt. You know, it's hitting $30,000 a year in the US, 40,000 pounds here for people that borrow. It's completely unacceptable, and there are various ways that this can actually happen. To the criticism of too privileged, this is going to be a long conversation with the outside world, involved explaining the need for, or what the proper working conditions are that support learning and research, and then trying to share those with the outside world rather than guarding them jealously amongst ourselves in the form of tenure and so on. But the one that I'm talking about here is universal access to what 19th century advocates call the higher learning. That is, refusing to take lower income folks and give them second or third tier job training like higher education. What instead needs to happen is that vocationality be connected with the higher order thinking that we are happy to pay to give to folks that go to places like Cambridge and Stanford. Okay, so there's a lot that could be said about the list that I just described that may be criticized as too ambitious and irrelevant to teaching everyday students to accept functional positions in the economy. It may seem too demanding in a society that is social media driven, that is academically adrift, where a lot of students go to university to pay for a party. In fact, it is neither too ambitious nor too demanding. Over the past 2 generations, we have seen the culture and the high end of the economy shift their official demands from do what you're told to tell yourself what to do. It is simply discriminatory not to help all students be eligible for interesting, inventive, and of course, well-paid work, and also to help them help society reinvent itself outside of the demands of the current business system. Of course, this demand for creative capabilities is mostly today honored in the breach, present company accepted, obviously. Only part of the contemporary economy is a knowledge economy. The knowledge economy is relentlessly managerial, which does not help the development of these creative capabilities. And most of the fastest growing job sectors are medium-skilled jobs at best. In addition, a large part of the political spectrum sees mass creativity or even basic self-management, at least in the US, as subversive, as certainly not profitable, and will never pay taxes, at least in the current paradigm, to support it. None of these political realities change the basic direction of history towards higher learning. None of it changes the need for universities to provide the higher order skills that I put under the umbrella of creativity learning. None of it changes the need for society to pay the high cost of developing them. None of it changes our ability to reinvent teaching and learning for the sake of the future, which is exactly, of course, what this Center for Innovative Teaching is about to do. Thank you.